Sound is fixed now. We figured out a way to do this that works for both our ends. It was very painful to do, but mics and audio wise has been a pain in the ass occasionally, but it's stable. Let's hope it keeps that way. Today's episode will be shorter as we have much more limited ideas to work with, and that is due to life. That is in terms of my academic life as a full-time student. And coming up to assessment period, we have a lot of pressures and stresses around our progress. So, and that means then, as a direct result, what sort of topics are we going to be talking about, Mike?
No worries, Brennan. First of all, we're going to start with cultural similarity among co religionists within and between countries. Furthermore, to this, we're also going to be talking about the negative relationship between IQ and religion. And on my end, we will also talk at a minimum about how Russians returning to Orthodoxy within Russia proper is not necessarily a reflection of their religious beliefs per se, and also the different approaches on whether science is in contradiction to religion, complementary, or somewhere in between.
And as for length, 40 minutes to an hour should be, if we're going to be doing it seriously. Either way, though, it's not going to be a full hour and a half. Not enough content for that. Okay. Let's use this inbuilt sharing system. Can you see this correct?
Oh, yeah, great.
Okay, good. So, what aspect of this do you want to cover first?
Honestly, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, cool.
It's all pretty same, yeah.
That's fine. The question of this, which is quite interesting, is that of, do people affiliate with the same same religious tradition share cultural traits, if they're in different countries? And that's an interesting dynamic to question because it's a fascinating dynamic. In this report, for example, it says that they found that there is some cultural similarity amongst different groups based on religion. And that makes it a quite interesting situation. But to be honest, I find the reasoning behind this not even less exciting as some people may think it is. The whole thing about this is that some people may think this is a grand gesture to show that there's a universal truth narrative. But I disagree. The thing is, you get ideas from books and literature and ideas from people. If you're cultivated in a certain community or outlook, you will end up incorporating those ideals in that outlook. So is it any more surprise then that people who have a very similar religious upbringing have a very similar cultural worldview? Not really. Mike, any feelings on that initial commentary?
I've actually had a look throughout the entire article, and they keep on banging about that point that, generally speaking, if you have the same religion across national states, across national lines, you're going to have really similar culture. And to be fair, from my personal experience as a Christian, there's 40,000 denominations, 40,000. And what actually happens in a lot of times is that you're totally different because, for instance, one denomination is going to have liberal politics and the other one conservative. So it's very difficult, I suppose. I mean, for the most part, do I believe that people across the same religion, even though they have different denominations, have a similar culture? I'd say yes. But for me, I feel what Brennan is saying is the right opinion, generally speaking, is that in some way your worldview, which is passed down from your parents generation by generation, is also going to determine what sort of cultural values you have.
And anyway, for example, here for example, it says this: non-religious individuals across countries also share cultural values, offering evidence for the cultural evolution of secularization, while nation states were stronger predictor of cultural traits rather than religious traditions. And this is the most important factor behind this. Religion, and that's why I say that religion itself, while it may have some shared culture or shared values, itself isn't a indicator of national culture. It can exist in line with national culture, but the national culture itself is built off the situation surrounding the event of the culture itself. It's not really a case of the religion coming in and informing the nation. And that's where that's where this comes into play. And that's why, for example, it's quite a long text, as I said, and honestly, if you read through this properly, yeah. But the point of saying is that culture itself is not bound to religion, nor is it bound to faith. Culture itself is bound to your circumstances you live around, and even in a culture where you have a very homogeneous culture, you can still be that cultural outline. And ultimately, what Mike is saying here, what's talking about, is probably written here. While there are some reasons to expect that religious affiliation is an important predictor of global cultural variation in values, beliefs, and preferences, this is not a foregone conclusion. Alternatively, we may find that differences between countries overwhelm any similarities between members of the same religious traditions. Is that correct?
Well, what I find interesting is that what the article failed really to mention, obviously, it's not part of the scope of this particular article, is that, for instance, in those countries that are really religious, say the Islamic countries, not necessarily in Arabia, we're talking about Iran, for instance. And for me personally, what I find intriguing is that if they're highly religious and they dominate the culture, so in this case, how does that compare to other places in the world where people don't live for the culture? So a Christian, for instance, in the 21st century West, we don't live for the culture. So what does that mean in practice? Does that mean our national culture? And the part in the article actually talks about America, because why America is an interesting example and how it links to what I'm saying is that America is the one culture in the world, one of the with its abundance of research first and foremost, but they also realize that traditional religious values has put an undeniable mark upon America. So,
That may be the case, though, because of one factor, and that is how America, for example, is not really a secular country. It says it's secular, but it's not secular. It has, for example, the in the in terms of the what's their what's their office is called again?
The Constitution, Congress.
Congress, that's it. In Congress, for example, could you get into Congress while not being religious? No, and that's the issue. It's not really political culture that's the thing at play here. It's that religious people themselves have a supreme advantage over those who are not religious and impose values.
And I think that actually ties into something that I wanted to raise later on, which is that in a lot of these cases, there's sort of a state cult of religion. The state cult is that you essentially identify to be accepted as part of the state. But when it comes to personal beliefs, in a lot of time, these personal beliefs lag behind that of the actual religion you espouse. So, for instance, in the third article, Russians return to religion, which we'll get to later, a lot of people identify as Orthodox Christian for the purposes of politics, but in truth, they don't really believe much of the teachings in that faith.
Sure, that's fine. Let's just get this. Just find another good quote from this. Keep talking in the meanwhile.
Yeah, we can go in more about Russian Orthodoxy and how
Not,
it relates to the political situation there, if you'd like.
not yet. Save that for that
Okay.
section, but keep it to the
Yeah, I'll
point.
remember.
But keep it to
Yeah.
the point about culture.
Mm.
So talk about that for now while we finish this one off.
Yeah, okay. There was one part also in this article that was interesting, is that across different countries, people who had similar religions were similar than those who had different religions across different countries. Clearly, given the correlation between the two.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find that?
Well, what really, how they defined cultural values was based on a portfolio, I guess. They had several things. It was based on economics. And say, for instance, leaning in more to America because a lot of the populace, at least nominally, identified with Protestantism. And Protestantism, when you compare it to other religions, such as Catholicism and Islam, it's a very personal relationship with God in Protestantism. You're saved by grace
Mm-hmm.
rather than faith through works, as in Orthodoxy and those other faiths. And because of that, because it's based primarily upon faith itself, that religion, what happens in practice is that people are free to pursue their material interests. And in a lot of these cases, you hear about WASPs, which
Mm-hmm.
is that wealthy American Protestants, WASPs. I'm sure Brennan knows the full acronym. He can save me here.
I actually really don't know that one to be honest.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just remembered it actually. Wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestants, WASPs.
Anyway, back on the point. I found something that can link to where to our next source. We also completed the pairwise cultural differences between all religious denominations and splitting up the samples into higher points of religion and lower points of religion. The average cultural distance between denominations was approximately the same within the sample who considered religion highly important and within the sample who considered religion not important. Whereas the distance was larger when comparing the high importance and low importance samples across denominations. That is, showing a level of commitment to religion as well as showing a religious affiliation, put it into greater cultural similarity. And that's just basically say that this honestly depends, doesn't it?
Mm.
It depends on fundamentally if ultimately your religion lies in line with the national cultural values or not. For example, right, the Arabs world, right?
Mm.
The Arab world Normally, as a whole, the principles of Islam is normally compatible with the national values already of those countries. And that's why, for example, in those situations, they can think that their religion is that their culture is based on religious values, but again, it's really not. It's just similar enough to the national culture, but it's different. Do you have any other opinion on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of these Middle Eastern countries and North Africa too, what happens is that essentially Islam is almost an Arab product in a sense. That's the a feeling I get with a lot of these folks in the Middle East and North Africa. And you get really bad examples of extremism in North Africa. I mean, not only that they persecute Christians, but they actually take it upon non-Arab Muslims, which is to say North Africans in particular. So, in a sense, what's my definitive position on this subject? Is it true that religion really determines culture? Um, I guess in a sense, the pre-existing culture has been latched onto the religion. So the Arab world hasn't really changed in culture for all these years. And in fact, how Muhammad essentially created Islam is that it was to be congruent with current social norms, and they didn't change a lot. Yeah, there was conflict. There was heaps of conflict between the pagans and Islam, but for the most part, a lot of them were converted. They got assimilated, and their history has become anew, essentially.
Right, I'm back now. I just went to the toilet. Anyway,
Okay.
have you done that one?
Yep, we can go on.
Right. Can you see this one still?
Yep.
Just confirming. Relationship between religion and social class. Just making sure you can see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. This one is actually quite interesting as well because this is relates to the culture argument. Okay, let's do this. Let's define things here. First things first. Relationship between religion, we already probably defined that enough already. We don't need to find that anymore. And social class. When I say class, they mean if you're low, middle, or high class. That's normally based on determinations of wealth as well as attitudes and or behaviors. Okay. There's also another metric to this which I think is also quite interesting, and that's also due to personalities. How some personalities are more inclined to be religious, whereas others aren't as inclined to be religious. To summarize that, since I can't find it this very second,
Uh-huh.
that is to say that people who have less care for pleasing people have less of a religious affiliation. People with more care for compassion have more religious affiliation. That's what the personality factor was defined as. Do you see any correlation between that personality model as well?
Hmm. Yeah, so goes the argument that what Christians and other theists lack in IQ, they make up for in EQ. And I find it sort of interesting because there's definitely a motivation having been, if you are brought up in the faith and you do believe in its principles in a fundamental way, that you would act according to those principles. And one of those is to be selfless. And so there's definitely that motivation of those who have come before the saints. And I believe a lot of followers would strive to meet that example.
Okay, let's keep in point to this thing now. The relationship between social classes and religion is not straightforward. The middle class are, in general, more likely to attend church, but they are also less likely to believe in God and less likely to be atheists and join the both world affirming and world rejecting things. The working classes are less likely to attend church, yet more likely to believe in God and than the middle class. Yet more likely to believe in God than middle classes. There are also certain denominations and even sects which may appeal specifically to the working classes, and this will fit into your point about the Russian Orthodoxy, won't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Actually, it's an interesting one because um, how it works in Russia is that people in, and I've seen this in another article, those who go to college are actually more likely to believe in God. And they also have a positive relation to IQ, those who actually do believe in Him, which is kind of interesting because if you listen to what right wing propaganda says, it's cultural Marxism within the unis.
But but let's be real here. Any talk from them about what goes on in uni doesn't happen.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, keeping on point. Yes, let's keep on point, shall we? And
Mhm.
okay, but I find this interesting because do I think it's also based on class necessarily? I mean, partially not. For example, oh, come on, work, compute technology, work. Here we go. Working now. Laws 2009 found that lifelong theists disproportionately come from unskilled and semi-skilled manual backgrounds and were less likely to have academic qualifications. Conversely, lifelong atheists disproportionately come from higher professions and managerial backgrounds and are more likely to have experienced higher education. I'd say also in this regard, this does relate to it, Mike,
Mhm.
and that is to say, with a higher education, I will also apply that to say higher academic understanding of the religious texts. People who are basically that's to say people who studied the theistic texts themselves know it know it very well,
Mhm.
but but they don't accept it. And that is also in the same camp of experienced higher education.
I actually think, I mean, this isn't really controversial, but no one
I,
would
I,
make
I'm,
some.
I,
I'll say one thing. I'll say just quickly one thing. If you're talking about people in general, yes, I mean, that's what the literature actually says. If you're talking about like church fathers and monks, I reckon it's a totally different ball game because they have an understanding that nobody else has in this regard. For me personally, so I'm sort of being a fanboy over here.
I may be a fanboy, but my point overall is, for example, I do know people, um, either online or in person, who are anti-theists like myself, right? And the
Hmm.
one common factor we all have is that we know a lot about our own respective religions, and that was a big foundation of what had us all leave. And,
Hmm.
and that's why I say that. And that's why I say, and that's why I say, that stereotype is not a stereotype, but rather something which has been proven in many ways for me.
Yeah, yeah, it's anecdotal in this case, but I'll take your word for it. I mean, it's testimony of a sort too. And I think this is a little bit philosophical. I won't rally on about philosophy because we're short
I
on
can,
time here, but
uh, not such all the time because you said this doesn't have time limit, right?
Yeah, no worries, no worries. But I mean, in a more general sense. But that being said, I think what a lot of people struggle with, no one's too dumb to understand something, in my opinion. There's a few examples in the general population, but we're talking people with IQs here who are maybe below 70 IQ. That's what Jordan Peterson says. As soon as you're below 70 in IQ, you tend to really like lose focus. You lose like bodily function. But that being said, I think a lot of people these days they're struggling because they're not. It's not that they're dumb. I never take anyone's intellect for granted. I think anybody can actually understand most things. The problem is what people aren't lacking is knowledge. They're actually lacking in obedience because a lot of these people who are struggling, they're struggling because they know this is bad for them and yet they still do it. So the problem is for instance, especially children nowadays. I won't rant too much, but I'll just make this point to finish off with. If children don't listen to their parents, well, what's going to happen? Because the parents know best at the end of the day. So sometimes I feel like, yeah, we should defer what we understand to people who are more higher in intellect. But generally speaking, I don't think people's lack of intelligence is what's holding them back. It's that
Uh,
they're committing the same mistakes over and over again.
Mike, here you go. And here you go. This should help. Does this help?
Yep.
Okay, back to this. Anyway, yeah, back to this. And at least they admit this isn't foolproof, and of course, and this is a really important factor here. Even if data suggests that church attendance and beliefs are higher amongst the middle class, that doesn't necessarily mean that the middle classes are actually more religious. They may be tending to keep up appearances or get to a local church school, or they may feel under more social pressure to state that they are religious than the working class. And that is also a massive factor behind religion, which often people forget. The peer pressure element surrounding religion is really important.
But I actually wanted to ask you, Brennan, what do you think about what I said? Is it that people are lacking knowledge nowadays, or are they lacking obedience? Because they see other people making mistakes, yet they don't learn from other people making mistakes.
I think that's more knowledge because the thing is, I don't think people should have absolute obedience. That I find to be a dumb thing. Healthy obedience, when necessary, is fine, but absolute obedience, I think, is a bit ridiculous.
Hmm. I mean,
So,
the problem is really is that in a lot of ways,
and
regardless of faith, regardless of faith, generally speaking, parents know the best for their children, right? And then the problem is that we
sometimes
got a
not.
society, yeah. Well, the
Some
problem is
uh,
it's we got a
uh,
society, okay, like, and then basically parents are actually not being empowered to make decisions on behalf of their children because a lot of these times, as you're saying about healthy obedience, and I'll move on to this article since you brought it up. I'll just finish my point here.
sure.
Say, for instance, if a parent has made an educated decision about vaccination, now, controversial opinion, I know, and say, for instance, they really feel from what they've read, they can be medical professionals, they maybe aren't medical professionals, and they feel that for the moment they don't want to vaccinate their kids. They want to do it by the time they're ready for primary school, for instance, even though that's not recommended for a lot of these in particular. And then what happens is that they're not allowed to be part of the play school if they aren't vaccinated. So
Rightfully so.
in some sense, I feel that power is being taken away from the parents, and that's
I
why obedience is
disagree.
so important.
Mike, I disagree. The vaccine stuff about vaccinations and stuff like that is there for a reason. Because the thing is, as much as some parents may think they know everything, there's certain things which is needed to protect other people from other things. It's, in terms of the children, if they aren't vaccinated, that means they themselves are a potential risk to other children. Because if you have to understand that children have weak immune systems compared to adults, and you can't have a shared space in which children are allowed to go unvaccinated, because that's like us. That's like allowing a carrier to basically potentially infect the whole room of children. That's not good.
Actually, the thing is, I'm not going to be the one to argue about the specifics. But what I find really unfortunate is the lack of disrespect shown to parents. And there's a general lack of disrespect, not only through the children, and I don't want to go too much about this subject, but it actually starts from home. A lot of the issues we see in our current society, a lot of things, because the children don't listen to the parents, and then they find the bad crowd. That's generally what happens. And I think the issue is that when we got the state being so powerful as it is within liberal society, we can see the totalitarianism within the past couple of years since COVID. And the problem is when the state is so strong, it actually weakens the family structure. You'd think that there'll be a high correlation between the state and the family, but in some way, that's part of their agenda is to weaken the family. Anyhow, I digress, but that's food for thought. Now, I'd like to continue.
Mike, so for 1 second. Back to our point. Sorry, caused some technical issues there. Technical stuff I was sorting out to make sure everything's smooth. But regardless, let's get to the point about the Orthodox Church.
Yes. And one of the biggest arguments you're going to find if you spend any time within American politics or just in general, the politics surrounding the Russian Orthodox Church and the current war in Ukraine, you're going to hear a very oft repeated slogan that the Russian Orthodox Church is a tool of the Russian state under Vladimir Putin. And what I wanted to know objectively as a believer myself was, is this true? Or is this just another liberal lie? Well,
One
let's
thing,
find out this.
Mike, one thing specifically to clarify is when you say Orthodox, which Orthodox are you? Which variant of Orthodoxy?
No worries. I've been baptized within the Serbian Orthodox Church myself. And going on and linking it back to the previous article about culture and religion, another criticism against the Orthodox Church in all its different countries worldwide is that, for the most part, if you're part of the Russian Orthodox Church, for example, it's only for Russian speaking people, only for people of Russian ethnicity. But this is not exactly true. Because according to the scriptures, and one of the best arguments against racism is that there is no Greek or Jew in Jesus Christ. So I wonder who exactly are making these accusations against the Orthodox Church. And once again, it must be a liberal accusation. Now, the article I'm going to bring up
Uh,
is going to prove,
Two
unfortunately,
seconds. 2 seconds.
okay,
Let me just get this up properly. There is no Greek or Jew. Fucking mic sometimes. Sorry. There's no Greek unto
or Jew in Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ. Sorry, 2 seconds, Mike. I'm doing something. Fine, I can't get very quickly there. Sorry about that. Sorry, that was putting the animal to bed. Galatians. Okay, good. This is the one, correct?
Yes, and it's so important to understand that this argument that the Russian Orthodox Church overseas and other congregations, they aren't merely for one ethnicity. In fact, it's for anyone who shares the similar faith. And this is why one of the best arguments against racism within the New Testament is that there is neither
And
Greek nor Jew in Jesus Christ. But
okay,
I'd
good.
also like to
Good.
say one more
Good.
thing.
Yes.
There's an actual Old Testament argument against racism, and that one
And that is tell me up. Get up.
is that you are made in the image and likeness of God.
There you go.
Okay, so starting on from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And this is such an important verse in terms of combating racism because the truth of the matter is that everyone holds objective value. We all know this, but people these days are confused about why do people have objective value? And this is why people have objective value. And it is one thing when we deny a brother, someone who's a different race than us, when we treat them differently, and when we don't treat them right, and we don't ascribe them the value that they genuinely hold, being made in the image and likeness of God. And because of this,
Mike.
racism, what the Catholic Church has extrapolated is that racism is actually a condemnable offense. It's
Mike.
a
Mike.
crime
Mike.
against
Mike.
heaven that
Mike.
calls out for vengeance.
Let's keep on the orthodox point.
No worries. Now, according to the liberals, what they claim is that the Russian Orthodox Church in America, which is now the Orthodox Church of America, is an outpost for pro Putin, pro Kremlin politics. Now let us see if Russian Orthodoxy is their state religion, and is it a tool of the state? Oh, okay.
Okay,
Over
sure.
the past 2 decades, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's been an upsurge in affiliation with Orthodox Christianity in Russia. Between 91 and '08, the share of Russian adults identifying as Orthodox Christian rose from 31% to 72%, according to a new Pew Research Center analysis. We'll carry on. And then conversely, during the same period, the amount of people in Russia identifying with no religion collapsed from 61% to 18%. So, are all of these believers genuine, or are they merely careerists trying to get into bed with Putin and the Kremlin monarchs? Let's see. Trends in Russian religious practices and beliefs. Percentage of Russian adults who said they believe in God, 56% as of 2008. Pretty outdated data. But if you compare it to the amount of people who believe in orthodoxy above, it was 72%, correct?
Correct.
And so I wonder, a lot of people identifying with orthodoxy, but they don't seem to share even the most common tenets of the faith, such as believing in God, which is essentially critical to all theist religions, and especially Abrahamic religions, God being a single deity.
My exciting piece out here is look at the 1998 and 2008 stats on attend a religious service at least once a month. I mean, that is better. That better proves the point.
Perhaps. I mean, see here, there's a clear disconnect between the amount of people who profess Russian Orthodoxy, yet in practice, there's not much attenuation to the faith. And some of the more complex aspects of the faith include a belief in life after death. And as we can see here, not even half of people who profess Russian Orthodoxy believe in life after death.
Sure.
Most interesting. And the other question in terms of Russian Orthodoxy is the extent to which are people who are converting to the faith after the fall of communism, is this a legitimate expression of longly held oppressed faith? Or is this merely another change in careerism, as that of people professing atheism to be a part of the Communist Party? Well, let's continue reading. For centuries, Orthodox Christianity was the dominant religion in Russia. This began to change in the early 20th century, following the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution and the imposition of state-sponsored atheism as part of communist ideology. Now, during the Soviet period, many priests were imprisoned, many churches were converted to other uses or fell into disrepair, and people who publicly professed religious beliefs were denied prestigious jobs and admission to universities. So there you have it. People had to identify with state atheism to have a cushy role in the CPSU. Now, while it is likely that some share of the population continued in private to identify with the Orthodox Church and other religious groups, it is impossible to measure the extent to which these attachments survived underground during the Soviet period and to what extent they faded away. Similarly, it is difficult to disentangle the extent to which the upsurge in Orthodox affiliation found in the surveys below represent an expression of long-held faith or a genuinely new wave of religious affiliation. It may be that after the fall of the USSR in 1991, Russians felt freer to express the religious identities they had quietly maintained during the Soviet era. However, given that the share of Russians identifying with a religion rose almost as much between 98 and '08 as it did from 91 to 98, the data suggests that the change is not solely an immediate effect of the collapse of the Soviet system.
Mike. So then, in this context, what then do you think it means?
Well, I'm having a look here just at the graph below, which immediately demonstrates this point, is that actually people over a certain age, 50 and older, so these people would have been born under communism, because at minimum they would have been born in 58, they're more religious than those who are younger on in practice. And you see this both in 91 and 2008. There's a higher percentage of people identifying as Orthodox Christians. So for me personally, I find that as time goes on, we identified in a previous article that there's a trend of secularization globally, so that the younger generations are losing the faith bit by bit. And because these people would have been born under communism, I believe that the first thesis is correct, that a lot of these people were Christian and they had a genuine or somewhat genuine belief in the faith, even though they didn't necessarily live it in a day to day experience, compared to those who are born now, and they also increase the numbers of people identifying as Russian Orthodox. I find it interesting that in Russia, particularly, there was a resurgence of the faith after the Soviet Union fell, but a lot of the younger generations, those who are born after communism, actually have rejected the faith. And if you compare the relative level of people who believe in Christianity before and after communism in Russia, you'll find that there's been a slight decline. It's very subtle, but generally speaking, you'd have almost 100% belief in Christianity, apart from perhaps Islam before the Romanovs fell in 1917. But nowadays, it's a lot more mixed. There's a good mix of atheists and agnostic people too in the post-USSR world, and you can
Um,
see a lot of that is influenced by
in
communism.
terms of this,
Yeah.
this goes look. In terms of this, talk about this point then.
Mm-mm-mm. Definitely. I mean, you can see a clear trend here. 7 year older at this stage in 2008, they would have been born around the Great Patriotic War, and this time was a terrible time in Russian and Soviet history. 27 million people died, and the USSR just so happened to legalize the Orthodox Church again and increase its prestige. They hope to bring a lot of religious believers in defense of the USSR, given that they were in an existential crisis against the Nazi German invasion. So no doubt a lot of these people who are young, they had a chance to be baptized at an early age, and they've continued the faith. And you see this similar trend in a lot of post-communist countries where the older people still have more faith than the younger generation. You see this evident in their church participation, a lot more elderly. You go to a church nowadays in the West, you'll see a lot more elderly than youngsters. And those
And
who bring the youngsters are generally families. Yeah.
and sorry. What this? Okay, it's fine. It's fine. It's a turtle not being confused, not wanting to go to bed yet. Okay, it's fine. As I was saying, so are you suggesting then that even with the claim of greater numbers within the Orthodox faith, it's still a farce to the most part, correct?
There's definitely concerning theological beliefs I identify here as someone who genuinely tries their best to live the faith on a daily basis, which is what orthodoxy calls for in practice, obedience. And you see here a lot of the decline, I suppose. It's an increase, absolutely, but as you see here, the majority do believe in God, but majority don't believe in life after death, which is an interesting concept not to believe in, given the fact that the majority of world religions have an afterlife, even from
And
ancient times.
Anyway, Mike, to reinforce the point about it being more of a career thing. Look at this. That for example here, right?
Hmm.
Amongst education, it's pretty equal amongst education levels. Meaning the point of it being a career thing or social trend thing might be a thing because if there's parity between less educated and university educated people alike, that probably means it's not about intelligence or emotional intelligence or anything like that. It probably means it's talking about other factors. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I'm actually of the opinion, I mean, I've analyzed all the data so far, and in my head, I've come to the conclusion. The conclusion being that there's both the liberal claim that that Russian Orthodoxy has been subsumed as a state religion is both correct and incorrect to a certain degree. Because I feel there's a genuine revival in religious belief, but it's not enough necessarily to out outweigh the effects of communism upon genuine spirituality. And we can see here, for instance, majority do believe in God. So in a sense, they are theist and they are orthodox, and that's very basic part of the orthodox belief. But it is quite concerning that some of these other aspects of the faith they don't believe in, such as life after death. Personally, as someone who is orthodox himself.
Fair enough. Fair enough, and you have that right.
Hmm.
Right. Next point.
No worries. This is something that you'll hear a lot. A lot of Christian apologists always bring up the fact that you realize in debates with atheists, you realize that they often claim that science is opposed to religion. Well, not necessarily, depending on your worldview. So there's three different worldviews here.
Right.
Hmm.
Let's just get clarifications done first. Science. Let's just get definition here. Science.
Hmm.
Purpose of science. Let's just work off that, shall we? Let's not go off pseudoscience. Here we go. This is the important factor here. Science as a collective institution aims to produce more and more accurate natural explanation of how natural world works, what its components are, and how they get to be in the way they are now. And that I think is what should be distinguished here before muddying the waters with anything else. because I had a actually I had a argument with someone at university of this. They themselves were religious, and they were imposing religious values over stuff that's a simple biology, for example. And that I think is a case of where when people talk about science, don't think of it out of the context of science itself. Back to your point.
No worries, yeah. And it's so important actually to agree on a working definition of science. Now, I'd like to go on to the first worldview, which is to say that Abrahamic religion and science are fundamentally antagonistic. So let's have a look. Scroll down if you don't mind, Brennan. I'll tell you when to stop.
Sure, where to?
Okay. Many people, both religious and non-religious, hold that not only that traditional religious beliefs and the claims of modern science are in direct conflict, but also that the respective presuppositions of religion and science are fundamentally opposed. One critic of Islam, Ibn Waraq, so he seems to be a former believer, claims that science directly conflicts with Muslim religious beliefs on a number of issues. But the more fundamental difference is a question of methodology. Islam relies on blind faith and uncritical acceptance of texts on which the religion is based, whereas science depends on critical thought, observation, deduction, and results that are inherently coherent and correspond to reality. While many would not doubt object to Warwick's self-avowedly polemical characterization of Islam, his stance nevertheless clearly exemplifies the first position. Science and religion are in direct conflict. For religion, Warwick claims involves blind faith and uncritical acceptance of texts, whereas science is based on critical thought, observation, and deduction, and yields results that are inherently internally coherent and which correspond to reality. Let me unpack this if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'll tell you where I agree and where I disagree, just straight up. Now, blind faith is an interesting one because, for the most part, okay, I can't speak on Islam's behalf here, but in the New Testament, faith is actually based on knowledge to some extent. So no one can actually believe something they don't know. I mean, it's possible. There's an example actually where Paul goes to preach the gospel in ancient Greece and they believe in the unknown God, and that unknown God just so happens to be the creator. But anyhow, for the most part, faith can't be blind in practice because you need to know what you actually preach. You need
Okay.
to actually know what you believe in.
Okay. I just want to clarify this one point here,
Yeah.
because I think this article explained in a weird way, but
Uh-huh.
which can lead to confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Where science is based on critical thought, observation, and deduction and yields of what is internally coherent and which corresponds to reality, the implication, of course, is that religious beliefs are not the product of critical thought. Okay. When you hear that statement, what do you think that means?
Well, first of all, one of the first things, if you want to know something's right in science, you need to be able to observe it. And you need to also be able to, in a sense, repeat that experiment in order to achieve similar results. So that's the results that are internally coherent.
Move forward. Move forward. Okay.
Okay.
This is more a claim about truth.
Mm-mm.
Because, for example, what it's basically saying is the scientific model there isn't really an absolute truth. There's observational studies which can be proven wrong or disproven, but reflect the natural world. Whereas in religion, there seems to be a more utopianistic or black and white logic, which is a core point
Mm.
here. And what is being critiqued here is lack of critical thinking within religion towards the texts prescribed towards it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to actually bring up the acceptance of text, because if we're talking about text in an absolute sense, i.e., fundamentalism, I actually am inclined to agree with you on that. Go up a bit more if you don't mind.
What's he?
They make up. Go up to page 4. This one, yes. Let's stay on that one for the moment.
3 mean? Sure, that's fine.
Three, but 4 on terms of that one, the point up. No, but I mean, if you're talking about fundamentalism, they do rely on an absolute, like basically a literal interpretation of text. But you'll find even within Islam, which is like a really dogmatic religion, by the way, you'll find that people have different opinions, and it's similar to science into the extent that they actually have to form a consensus sometimes on what the Quran's actually telling them.
Mike, you're missing the point. The point I'm
Mm,
saying is
mm, mm.
is that look, even if you have a liberal or fundamentalist religious claim, it does not matter in this respect. What is being meant here is to say that the religious claim, be it liberal or fundamentalist, is still an absolute truth claim in which is being promoted. And more so specifically a truth claim under either model of liberalism or progressive liberalism or fundamentalism surrounding something in which they cannot verifiably prove. And that's what it's saying. It's not really attacking fundamentalism itself, it's attacking theism itself for having no source of credibility to reinforce itself.
I would say on that, on balance, there's more evidence than there is evidence against it. But I understand that for different people, they sometimes require an absolute measure of proof. If that's what you truly desire.
That's how it often works, yes, an absolute measure of truth.
Okay, no worries. I'll move on then.
Because
Despite the fact that many in the 20th century rejected this implied characterization of religion, the notion of an irreconcilable conflict between religion and science remained a commonly held one. Moreover, the popular image of the modern scientist who sets at naught traditional religious wisdom in pursuit of objective scientific knowledge invites the conclusion that science and religion are locked in unremitting conflict. While this image might be somewhat of a caricature, it is nevertheless reminiscent of those early 20th century scientists who, convinced of positivism, held that science is the only reliable source of knowledge and that all religious claims should be shunned because they are based on groundless superstition. Now, I'll actually like to jet in here, and it's somewhat a philosophical difference between worldviews. So, positivism is a philosophical theory that you can essentially rely on experience. Experience is the primary teacher of knowledge. To really simplify it and dumb it down a little bit. Correct. Basically an experience in which you have evidence for it. And then
okay,
you've got, on the
it's
other
fine.
hand, rationalism, which is what religion actually believes in. So it's actually an interesting contrast that causes the worldview. Philosophy is a lot more important than mere belief. And yet, believe it or not, faith in a god is actually rational because,
Okay.
believe it or not,
I've also shown definitions so people know what aren't confused. That's all.
yeah, no worries, no worries. But there's reasons for why believing in God is rational, because essentially what we're trying to establish here with the truth,
Okay. This is
and
why.
it's something related to the
Mike,
article,
Mike.
if you don't mind.
This is why I said in the beginning about the personality metric.
Mm,
It depends on your personality. Because, for example, for you to say it's rational would mean for me, I would say the opposite. I'd say it's not rational. Why would you assume there's a higher power? Why do you assume that?
Okay, it's because if we essentially substitute worldviews for our scientific model, if we're trying to correct, if we assume that our worldview is a scientific model, and that a scientific model is one based with the highest amount of predictive power, and the reason why scripture is a scientific model is because, generally speaking, everything that's been written has come to
I would
pass.
say okay, okay.
Not everything, but
No,
the
no, no,
most
no.
part,
Okay,
up
okay.
to Revelation.
No, 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 no. This is where I disagree. Give me 2 seconds. Sign. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. For example, I'm just giving out the things, the definition up. But I'd say though, even within this, it's still not scientific because it needs to be repeatable and evidential, which religion often isn't.
Oh, well, you know me, I'm an Old Testament guy, and say for instance all the prophets, which is a bunch of books basically in the Old Testament. It's divided into four parts. I
I
won't talk
know you're
about
an
the
autism
structure too much.
person. I know that. I am just saying. I'm just saying. Scientifically, religion cannot be said to be scientific because religion cannot stand up to scientific rigor when it comes down to actually having to prove its claims over multiple tests.
I wanted to kind of press a little bit on that point. In regards to something being repeatable, how is it that something can be repeated if the event only happens once in world history? So, say for instance, they predict the fall of Israel to the Babylonian Empire. How can they actually repeat that again? I mean, we know that it happened through historical records, but why does it have to be twice or three times? Why does it have to be repeatable? Why can't the event just happen once, according to the prediction?
The point is that in a Bible, no, the issue with the Bible is the the issue a lot of people have with the Bible. In the example is, for example, they're talking snake analogy, for example,
Hmm.
and that's due to one simple fact that snakes can't talk at all. As in, they literally don't have the vocal cord ability to talk.
But see, you miss do you understand the spiritual significance
No, I
of the
don't.
snake? Oh, okay. So the point was is that the evil one, the devil, actually took that form, and we know
That's not
like
the point. But again, though, I've read that chapter in the Bible, and there was nothing that mentioned the devil.
aha. But then if you skip forward to Revelation, and then sometimes
And
Revelation
that
actually describes
shows,
parts of Genesis because it's
how.
sort of like a bookend.
Okay, okay, and
But can
that
I at least say that,
and that
for
shows
instance,
how
in
bad of a
Revelation, the serpent is identified with the
and that
devil
shows
in
how bad of a
Revelation.
okay. That shows how bad of a methodology that is. If okay, I'm not. I don't think it's okay. All I'm saying is there's lots of issues in that stuff which is recorded in the Bible that physically cannot happen.
But
And
this isn't it, because it's not just a snake. Like, it's a
I use
symbolic meaning as well
I
as a
use
physical one.
I use a snake as an example. There's many more than that. There's many more contradictions in the Bible. But the point is, I'm saying is that this is the issue you're dealing with here. When you want to make these claims, you need more than You need more than just that to say it.
Okay, but so you're basically asking for corroboration of evidence.
Yes.
Okay, okay. So if the Old Testament in particular is the Israeli tale of how they came out of Egypt, so it's essentially oral tradition. The same story's been passed on for generation and generation. That also counts as corroborated evidence. Excuse me.
Right. Let's keep pushing forward.
Do
In
you
the
not agree that do you not agree that oral tradition counts as corroboration?
No,
Oh, okay. So you'd need to talk about someone else's history, not just the Israeli history.
correct.
Okay, right, fair enough.
Because it has a history example. It needs to be recorded in at least two or three history books, or two or three histories with enough similarities and mention, and that's why, for example, Trojans. That's why I can say Trojans existed because it was mentioned in the Hittite and Greek sources,
Mm, mm.
and therefore the Trojans existed.
Okay, I mean, we can like continue on like having a debate about it. Like, say for instance, one thing that comes to mind is, in a sense, how the Quran's based off the Bible. So, I mean, these people's oral
Um,
history is similar to the Israeli oral history, which would
and
count as two
and
different corroborations, correct?
and
Because they corroborate each other.
my mic. Next time we can get back to the source, but in the aspect of time, let's just try and get some conclusion before it gets too long. Um, what I,
No, it's actually, wait a second. Let's go back to the article. Let's talk about the two different worldviews on whether science.
be quick then.
Okay. Okay, the commensurability view. Those adhering to some version of a second position on the relationship between religion and science, the non-antagonistic incommensurability view, typically argue that science and religion are autonomous domains of human understanding, with each focusing on different objects of inquiry. Stephen Jay Gould, for example, argues that because science and religion have different subject matter, there could be no genuine conflict between their respective claims. Indeed, the view that science and religion do not make claims about the same aspects of reality is fairly common. One motivation for this view is a widespread conviction that, whereas science is concerned with supposedly value neutral facts about the objective world, religion is concerned with evaluation. The famous biologist John Maynard Smith, for example, expresses this conviction when he asserts that scientific theories have nothing to say about the value of human beings. That's an interesting one. Adding
And
that such theories.
Mike, and that's absolutely correct. There's nothing in science that has to say about value of human beings. That's just not
Hmm.
part of it. All it says is are you a human? Are you a living being? Yes, no. Basically,
And you kind of see, I mean, this is like a whole another can of worms that we don't have time to deal with at the moment, but you can see in a sense how people who are genuine belief in Galatians chapter 3:28, that people are, that there's no Greek or Jew in Jesus Christ, how that could be used as a symbol of anti-racism, whereas a lot of the time, some of the more social Darwinist understanding of evolution was that black people ascended from monkeys.
I mean,
So it's some contrast here.
sure, that's fine, it's fine. Sure. 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 The social Darwinist thing. I mean, yes, sure. But at the same time, social Darwinism isn't even that common of a thing within atheism anyway. So it's like, if you want to compare the two, that's fine. But it's not really a thing most atheists adhere to, in my experiences.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, nihilism, social Darwinism can go tact in tact.
And
But would you say that atheism is based on nihilism to
no,
some degree?
no, not at all.
Ah, okay. So you're more of an existentialist philosophy. You're essentially saying that, okay, I ascribe value to life. Like I
Exactly.
have my own reasons for existing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. It's just a case that you don't actually adhere your value in life to a god or a higher power. Your value in life is determined by what you do to others, and the thing is, even the Pope himself will be literally fine with that metric. The Pope himself said, if you just do good works and are compassionate, and that's enough, and you don't have to be religious.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, Sometimes that's not what the Bible says. All right, let's move on to the third opinion.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure. Speed run it
No worries.
because as to not have
Yeah,
this
okay.
last a million years.
All right, finally, the complementarily view. In the 11th century, Al Ghazali argued that those who denied the findings of science in an attempt to defend their religious beliefs do religion more harm than good. In so arguing, he set a precedent for those 20th century thinkers who held that a religion cannot remain credible if it retains beliefs in the face of scientific knowledge which appears to refute them decisively. Many of those who believe that science cannot be safely ignored by religious believers adopt some version of the complementarily view, according to which science and religion will ideally form part of an integrated worldview within which each contributes to the other. Clearly, according to this position, scientific theories will not be viewed as alternate accounts of reality that rival religious ones. The claim is not therefore that scientific theories are substitutes for religious theories or vice versa. Now, this is probably close to what I actually believe, which is to say that faith allows us is a mystery in some cases, and science is what we are allowed to actually understand. And there's never going to be a time in history where we unlock the mystery to all mysteries. We're never going to have absolute knowledge of the world. That alone belongs to him. But slowly,
I'm,
bit by bit, we can understand a bit more through science of the natural world.
Mike. The thing is, the difference is here is that yeah, is that yes, I also agree. We probably won't ever find out every discovery about about human nature or nature itself, and that's fine. It's just that the difference is between us is that I just don't adhere or presuppose a higher power deity in absence of that. I just and as you know, I just say I don't know, so I don't know. And I just won't try and pretend to know.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, I totally get you, and I respect your opinion, and you as you do respect mine, and I definitely feel that. Would you like to finish it off on that note, or should we move on to something else? What do you
I
believe?
yeah, I guess so. Because of timings and that, I need to do some cooking. So do a end note. 2 minutes. 1 2 minutes. End note.
No worries. Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the fourth episode of Theism versus Atheism discussion and debate featuring Brennan and yours truly, Mike. Today, we covered similar things such as whether religion determines culture or vice versa. Furthermore, we also demonstrated that religion has a negative correlation to IQ but a positive correlation to EQ. And we also discussed the often repeated liberal assertion that Russian Orthodoxy overseas, the Orthodox Church of America, is merely an outpost of Kremlin politics. And having discussed this view, we determined that is about 50-50. I sort of agree and disagree with it. And finally, we moved on to the three different opinions on the antagonism between science and religion. The first one is that they are antagonistic, which is often repeated by evolutionists and atheist debaters. And also on the other side of the spectrum, we got the complementary view, which is often repeated by Christian apologists and those who believe in creationism. And finally, that while someone can believe in scientific views, they don't necessarily invalidate religion and vice versa. So, I hope you have had a really great experience listening to us both. Catch you later and catch you next time.